They called her a child of stone, though her skin was soft as any human's. To the aliens who raised her, she was an experiment in fragility, a creature from a world so violent it birthed nightmares, yet small enough to cradle in their scaled or luminous hands. They studied her heartbeat, slow but defiant, and wondered why her kind had not already extinguished themselves. She never answered their questions. Not because she didn't know, but because her father had once told her that strength was something quiet. He had said that true power did not shout, it endured. And so, on the alien capital of Deathworld, where suns burned blue and gravity hummed like music, she lived in silence. To the crystalline tutors who taught her the physics of wormholes, she was disciplined, curious, reserved. To the reptilian soldiers who sneered at her compact muscles and soft eyes, she was prey pretending to be predator. They laughed when she passed, mocking the strange simplicity of her diet: water, salt, plant, flesh, the staples of a primitive species. She smiled politely, bowed her head, and continued studying. Yet beneath her calm exterior, a pulse of memory never stopped beating. Earth. Red soil after rain. The scent of iron and ash from fires her father built to keep the darkness at bay. She could still see his hands, scarred, steady, kind. Hands that taught her how to carve tools, how to mend wounds, how to look at death and see only another challenge to overcome. She missed him in ways the aliens could never understand. To them, family was genetic necessity, a means of replication. To humans, it was everything. When her father died on that distant Deathworld, his silence became her inheritance. She carried it into the stars like a weapon she didn't yet know how to wield. In the gleaming academies of Deathworld, she became the quiet anomaly in a sea of brilliance. They studied antimatter vortices, she studied patience. They engineered warships that could unmake a moon, she built endurance in the vacuum of condescension. For years she said little, learned much, and waited. And then, one cycle, the galaxies shifted. A coalition of ancient races, the Vor, the Lien, the Obsidian Choir, convened to evaluate species deemed unstable. Humanity, still crawling across its newborn colonies, was among them. The Deathworlders. The unrefined. The unpredictable. A risk to the order of the cosmos. She was chosen to speak for her kind. The aliens called it a mercy. You know both worlds, they said. You will help them understand why humanity must submit, or be contained. She agreed, but only because she had seen the way they looked at her father's photograph, as if the man in that faded image were a ghost, a myth, a reminder that somewhere in the spiral arms of the galaxy, a small, stubborn world still dared to call itself free. The Hall of Judgment was carved from obsidian and light. Thousands of beings shimmered across the tiers, their voices weaving through the air like a storm of glass. She stood alone on the speaking platform, a single human framed by the radiance of stars. They spoke first, the elders of the Vor, whose bodies were woven from liquid metal and ancient thought. Humanity is a contagion, one intoned. They consume, adapt, and defy equilibrium. Even their offspring, its gaze shimmered toward her. Fail to comprehend restraint. Another voice joined, melodic and cruel. The human diet alone proves their primitivity. They ingest toxins for pleasure. They devour the corpses of lesser life. They breathe air thick with the scent of decay and call it home. Laughter rippled through the assembly. She said nothing. Her silence drew amusement, then contempt. And then one being, tall, radiant, cruelly beautiful, drifted forward. A Lien admiral, his eyes like molten sapphire. Your father was one of them, was he not? He asked softly. Tell us, Deathworld girl, did he die screaming, or did he beg his poisonous world for mercy? The chamber fell silent. For the first time, she looked up. Her eyes, brown, human, unremarkable to their instruments, caught the starlight and turned it into something deeper, older. The silence stretched until it trembled. Inside her, the memory of her father's voice stirred, not in words, but in the rhythm of a heartbeat that had never known surrender. The silence held, deep and unnatural, as though the vast hall itself were waiting to inhale. The light above her dimmed and the stars beyond the glassed dome flickered, reflections swimming across her pupils. Her lips parted, not for sound, but for breath. That breath carried the taste of ozone, the remembered tang of dust and metal and storm from a world that killed the careless. She looked at the Lien Admiral, and for a heartbeat she saw the world through her father's eyes, the long dawns over a horizon scoured by wind, the way the sun rose red through the smoke of burning forests, the way he had stood, bare and unyielding, while predators circled. He had not begged, he had endured. And in that memory something ancient, something terrible, moved. The floor beneath her feet trembled. The aliens glanced at one another, uncertain. Energy readings spiked along the chamber's perimeter. She exhaled, and with that breath the resonance of her homeworld stirred, an echo of gravity heavier than it should be, a field born from generations of survival. The Deathworld had shaped her body to adapt to poisons, pressure, pain. It had also shaped her mind. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, quiet, utterly human. "My father did not beg," she said. "He listened." A murmur swept the crowd. The Admiral's smile thinned. "Listened? To what?" "To the silence that comes before a storm," she said. "The silence that decides who will live through it." She lifted her gaze to the assembly. "You call my people poison. You call our breath decay. But you forget that life itself is born of poison. Every world you now inhabit was once toxic. Every breath of your perfect air comes from the ruin of something older." Her voice did not rise, yet the air seemed to tighten around each word. "We are what the universe makes when it wants to remember how to fight. My father taught me that the stars don't give mercy. We took it from them." The hall rippled with sound, disbelief, indignation, awe. The Lien Admiral stepped forward, rage flickering in his crystalline veins. "And what will you take from us, human?" Her eyes hardened. "Only what you offered." The ground split. Not with explosion, but with pressure, gravity folding in on itself like a pulse. She hadn't meant to reveal it here, not yet, but the instinct of her world was stronger than fear. She reached inward, into the biological symphony that Deathworld evolution had written into her blood. Nerve by nerve, molecule by molecule, she commanded the resonance. The air grew heavy. Metals warped. Light bent around her silhouette, as if the universe itself recognized its architect. Aliens gasped, choking on gravity they could not bear. "I am what you made," she whispered, though her voice rolled through the chamber like thunder underwater. "You raised me to believe your science was higher truth. You taught me how to hear the frequency of a star's birth. But I was born on a world that sings its own creation in the crack of stone and the roar of storm. 1,000 sensory organs burned with overload. The obsidian choir's crystal skin shattered in harmonic collapse." Still, she held her ground, her heart beating to a rhythm older than language. Then she stilled. The resonance faded. The hall's shattered walls hung in frozen fragments, suspended by the wake of her power. She stepped forward through the drifting debris until she stood before the Admiral. His eyes, once blinding, now dimmed to ash blue. "Now you know," she said softly. "Why we never needed to fight back until you mocked our dead." The fragments fell like rain. She turned and walked out of the hall, past beings who would one day whisper her name as legend, leaving behind only the echo of her father's silence, alive again, reverberating in the bones of the galaxy. Outside, the twin suns of Deathworld rose. The light struck her face, and for a fleeting instant she thought she could hear her father's voice carried in the wind. Not words, just that quiet rhythm. The sound of life that refuses to die. And beyond the horizon, something ancient stirred, an awakening in the dark between the stars, drawn by the heartbeat of a Deathworld girl who finally remembered who she was. The light of Deathworld bled into the void as she left the hall behind. Alarms whispered through the towers, the sound almost mournful. She felt the weight of 1,000 eyes following her, some in awe, some in terror, most unable to name what they had seen. She crossed the causeway alone. Beneath her, rivers of molten glass flowed between spires that sang their own artificial gravity. Above, ships moved like shadows across the twin suns. She could sense them now, every vibration of engine and hull, the invisible lattice of forces that held them aloft. Her senses had widened, or perhaps the universe had simply stopped hiding from her. She remembered the years of study, of being the small figure in a room of beings that called themselves enlightened. They had shown her the equations that built their ships, the harmonics that tamed singularities. None of them had ever spoken of the living hum at the core of all things. On her world, it was the first sound a child learned to recognize, the voice of gravity, the echo of everything that had ever lived pressing back against the dark. Now she could hear it everywhere. It frightened her, not because it was vast, but because it recognized her. She reached the shuttle port. The Deathworld guardians bowed low, uncertain whether she was prisoner or prophet. She said nothing. The silence that had once been defense now carried command. Doors opened. Engines woke. The shuttle rose through the blue haze into the open gulf of stars. The planet's light fell away. Her father had once spoken of space as a wilderness that never ended, a place that tested everything built on the ground. We were meant to be tested, he'd said. That's how we learn where we end and where we begin. She touched the controls, feeling the tremor of living metal beneath her palms. The coordinates were already set, Earth. The word appeared in alien glyphs, small, forgotten, like a note left behind after an experiment concluded. She smiled faintly and engaged the drive. The slipstream unfolded. Space twisted and drew her through its woven throat. She saw flashes of stars forming and dying, the ghosts of civilizations etched into radiation trails. And beyond all of it, she felt something watching, a presence stretched across the corridors of time. The ship shuddered. A voice entered her mind, not in words but in tone, curiosity, recognition. She did not answer. When she emerged, Earth was smaller than memory. The colonies that circled it glowed faintly, their habitats built from the metal of comets, their gardens suspended in domes of light. Humanity had survived, and more than survived, they had spread like wildfire across the local cluster. The aliens had called it contagion. She saw only life. Her shuttle descended through pale clouds. The atmosphere bit into the hull, the friction singing. When she stepped onto soil, it felt both alien and known. Wind carried the scent of rain and iron and salt. She knelt and pressed her hand into the dirt. For the first time since leaving, the hum of the planet answered her not with recognition, but with belonging. In the distance stood the memorial stones, names carved into rock older than the first city. Among them, she found her father's. She did not cry. She simply sat, listening to the wind move through the grass, until she heard the second sound, the one that did not belong. Orbiting above, cloaked ships unfurled. The coalition had followed her, drawn by fear and curiosity, unwilling to let the Deathworld girl vanish into legend. She rose slowly. The air changed again. Gravity rippled outward in concentric waves. Birds took flight. Dust hung motionless. She looked to the sky and whispered, "They never learn." The first weapon descended, a lance of light meant to cauterize continents. It slowed, then stopped, caught in an invisible hand. She lifted her palm. The beam bent, folded, turned to harmless mist. From orbit, sensors screamed. Entire fleets adjusted formation. Commanders shouted orders that came too late. Her power reached into the spaces between particles, touching the same resonance she had felt on Deathworld. Only now it answered fully, a chorus of worlds singing through her. Across the void, the ancient races realized what they had done. In teaching her their science, they had taught humanity how to listen to the machinery of creation itself. And humanity had always been good at taking what was given and turning it into something greater. The sky broke open. The clouds burned away, and the upper atmosphere flared like a sea of glass. The coalition fleet appeared in layers, thousands of vessels overlapping like scales on a single creature, every hull inscribed with symbols of order. They had come to contain what they did not understand. On the ground, she stood among the stones. Her hair lifted in the static field, the air around her shimmered, bending sunlight into halos. She could feel every gravitational vector of the incoming armada, each engine core pulsing against the fabric of space. To the sensors above, she was a point of impossible density, a gravity well in human form. Her father had once told her that when a storm comes, you don't shout at it, you shape yourself so it passes through you. She breathed in, and the storm arrived. Orbital lances dropped from the stratosphere, white lines of annihilation. The ground shook. Trees vaporized. Shock waves turned oceans to steam. Yet at the center of that fury, she did not move. The light touched her skin and dissolved, scattering into auroras that danced across the hemispheres. In orbit, commanders stared as their targeting grids warped. They tried new frequencies, new equations of destruction. Each shot curved, slowed, lost coherence. Around Earth, the very constants of physics began to drift, tuned by her pulse. Then she rose. Not flying, but lifted by the resonance that once bound her world's mountains. The air folded into invisible wings. Her voice carried through no medium, yet every ship heard it. You taught me the language of stars, she said, and forgot that humans learn every language they're given. Her words rippled across the calm spectrum, through gamma and radio and thought. Circuits overloaded. Living ships screamed. The nearest dreadnought cracked open like ice under sun, its matter stretching into filaments of light. One admiral ordered retreat. Another shouted for containment fields. None could agree whether she was alive or the beginning of something new. She looked down. Earth's surface glowed beneath her, cities flickering, billions of hearts beating in frightened wonder. She felt them, each pulse a thread weaving into her own. The collective rhythm of a species that had refused extinction. And she realized she was not alone. The resonance that filled her body extended outward, touching every human mind that would listen. Across colonies, across moons and stations, men and women lifted their heads and felt the tremor in their bones. Instruments failed, but something older woke, the instinct of survival that had carried them from cave to cosmos. They reached back. Thousands of minor telemetric signals, stray neural waves, pulses of emotion converged on her like rain. She felt their hope, their fear, their defiance. Humanity itself became a single harmonic organism. The fleet faltered. Weapons dimmed. Gravity distorted. She opened her hands and the war stopped. For a breathless instant, the galaxy was quiet, listening, as if waiting to see what form the human heart would take when it decided not merely to survive, but to define creation itself. The ships held position, suspended above the curvature of Earth, their engines whispering against the silence. Somewhere within that frozen armada, minds older than recorded history waited for her next move. She rose higher, through thinning air, until she stood between atmosphere and vacuum. The auroras curled around her like silk. For a moment, the sky and space were one endless ocean, and she was the ripple that divided them. From beyond the fleet came a deeper shadow, a structure too vast to be called a ship, too deliberate to be a moon. The coalition had summoned their architects, the ones who whispered equations that birthed galaxies. They were not life as she knew it but the memory of civilizations so ancient their names had become constants in physics. Their presence folded the starlight. Voices entered her mind in chords of geometry and time, each syllable reshaping gravity itself. We built the order you threaten. She answered with a thought, and her words carried the scent of rain on iron. You built cages and called them laws. The architects unfolded further. Each was a lattice of energy so bright that mortal sight failed. Yet she could see them clearly, patterns of wool frozen into light. They had made the coalition's worlds, defined the limits of motion, the permitted range of creation. To defy them was to rewrite existence. But she had already begun. Her resonance widened, touching the hidden structures beneath atoms, the threads that linked mass to meaning. She saw how her father's silence, his patience in the face of a storm, was the same strength that held planets together. The Deathworld had not cursed her kind, it had given them the language of persistence, the formula for adaptation. She reached for that language and spoke. The wave rippled outward, invisible yet absolute. Constants trembled. Gravity became suggestion. Light slowed to listen. The architects recoiled, their perfect symmetry cracking along forgotten seams. One of them, a shape like a crown of suns, flared. You are a variable that should not exist. Her gaze met the flare, steady. We exist because we should not. That is our design. The word struck like a meteor. Reality flexed. Fragments of the architect's form scattered into the void, dissolving into the raw material of nebulae. The coalition fleet broke apart, some ships fleeing, others adrift. None dared fire again. She drifted among the debris, watching it turn slowly in the sunlight. For the first time, she felt the edge of exhaustion. The power that moved through her was infinite, but her body remained human, tethered to breath and pulse. She let the current fade until she could hear her own heartbeat again. Below, Earth turned, blue and silent. Above, the architects regrouped, diminished but unbroken. Their chorus returned, quieter now. You cannot hold this forever. Your species will scatter. Entropy will reclaim you, as it has all others. She thought of her father, of the hands that had taught her to shape stone, to mend wounds. Then let entropy find us still trying. She lowered her arms, and the resonance obeyed. The auroras dimmed, the wind softened. What remained was not victory or defeat but a promise. Through every human mind still connected to her, that promise spread, that no order, no God, no equation would ever define their limits again. The architects withdrew into the dark, their light folding like dying stars. The war had ended not in conquest but in revelation. She turned back toward the planet and began her descent, a trail of fading light behind her, unaware that the echo of what she had done was already rewriting the maps of galaxies. She fell through the quiet layers of sky, a line of dimming fire tracing her return. Clouds parted. Lightning flashed across her path but never touched her. When she reached the troposphere, the air caught her and turned her fall into a slow drift. Below, continents glimmered like fragments of memory. Cities that had once been small dots of light now sprawled along the coasts, every surface alive with motion. The network of satellites above them pulsed faintly, reorganizing around new parameters they could not yet name. She landed on the same hill where she had knelt beside her father's stone. The wind had shifted, the scent of ozone clung to the grass. She knelt again, tracing her fingers over the name carved there. It's done, she whispered. The words vanished into the air, carried by the resonance that never fully left her. She felt the planet respond. Every cell, every root, every circuit seemed to hum in a single tone. Across the world, people looked up from their work, sensing a change they could not describe. Engineers heard whispers in magnetic fields. Artists saw new shapes in light. Children dreamed of stars and woke speaking equations. The resonance was not hers anymore, it had become theirs. Humanity was evolving, quietly, without ceremony. The boundary between thought and matter thinned. A gesture became a signal, an emotion a force. Governments called emergency councils. Scientists compared data, unable to agree on what had changed. Some said the laws of physics were drifting. Others insisted humanity was simply learning to see what had always been there. She moved through the cities unnoticed, a shadow among her own kind. Screens flickered when she passed, glass hummed faintly under her fingertips. People turned their heads, sensing something they could not name. She smiled once, briefly. In orbit, abandoned coalition ships circled like ghosts. Human salvage crews boarded them, learning from the technology of those who had called them primitive. Within months, the first hybrid engines ignited. Travel between stars became not a dream but a map. And yet, she felt the cost. The more they changed, the more distant her father's world seemed. The silence he had taught her began to fade under the noise of progress. She missed it, the stillness between storms. One night she returned to the hill. The sky was clear. The aurora that once crowned the planet now pulsed faintly in rhythm with her heartbeat. She closed her eyes. If this is what we become, she murmured, let it still mean something. The wind answered with a low, steady whisper. She realized then that her father's silence had never been the absence of sound, it had been the presence of everything unspoken. She stood and looked upward. The stars were closer now, almost familiar. Somewhere among them, she sensed the architects watching, waiting to see if the variables they had tried to erase would stabilize or ascend. Humanity was still learning what it meant to touch the machinery of creation. But the lesson had begun, and it would not stop. She smiled again, a small human gesture against an infinite sky. We're not finished, she said. The oceans glittered with threads of light visible even from orbit. Each wave carried the shimmer of mind's awakening. Cities had learned to breathe, structures bending imperceptibly with the tides of thought. Engines no longer burned fuel, they sang to gravity itself, reshaping it with intention. Humanity had crossed the border between invention and creation. She walked through this new world quietly. Every step sent ripples through the field that bound all things. People no longer feared the void. They built ships of light and sound, vessels that folded reality like pages of a book. Children learned to navigate the resonance as easily as their ancestors had learned to walk. News spread through the networked sky, anomalies at the galactic rim, distortions like mirrored echoes. The architects were returning. They had retreated to repair themselves, to study the variable they could not destroy. Now they came not as conquerors, but as witnesses, to see if humanity had become another god or something stranger. Their arrival bent the horizon. Stars dimmed. Space thickened. The largest of them unfolded, a lattice of suns trembling with power. The old voice spoke again, resonating across all frequencies. You altered the pattern. Do you understand what you have made? She looked up at the glowing crown in the heavens and felt no fear. Around her, millions of human voices answered in unison, not with words but with a sound, low, deep, steady. The heartbeat of an entire species. She raised her hand. The sound grew until even the architects trembled. We didn't make anything, she said. We remembered what was already there. The architects tried to calculate her statement, but the numbers dissolved. For the first time in their existence, they experienced something that did not fit within equations: emotion. Curiosity became reverence. Fear became awe. Light fractured around them. Stars realigned. Across the galaxies, dead suns reignited. Humanity's resonance had not broken order, it had expanded it. The universe was evolving alongside its youngest children. She felt her father's presence then, not as memory but as part of the rhythm itself. Every beat of her heart echoed his silence, every breath carried the weight of the world that had made them both. The architects' forms faded, their voices reduced to whispers of approval. Then the pattern is complete, they said. Creation continues. She turned back to the people who waited on the luminous shores, their faces lit by auroras born of their own will. It's not complete, she said softly. It's just beginning. Above her, the galaxies pulsed in slow rhythm, like a vast cosmic lung inhaling and exhaling life. And for the first time in history, the universe itself seemed to pause, to listen, to the quiet power that had risen from one small, dangerous world. And so, the stars learned to fear the silence that came before a human spoke.